Hello and welcome. In this lab, I'll demonstrate how to configure PPP encapsulation with CHAP authentication over serial links on a Cisco router. So I have two routers in this topology, and I'll be connecting them through serial links or serial interfaces. Now the first thing is I have to add the serial interfaces to the routers, because by default Cisco routers do not, the 2901 routers do not have serial interfaces added. So I'm going to go ahead and add the HWIC2T card. That's the module, the HWIC-2T, that will enable me to add two serial interfaces to this router. So to add the serial interfaces, I'll have to do that in both routers. So I'll first have to power it off and just drag and drop into the empty slot there. And I'm gonna go ahead and do my CLI and power it back on, and I'll go ahead and do on router 1 the same configuration. So I'll first have to power it off and just drag and drop this HWIC-2T card. Now each card will add two serial interfaces to this router. So I'll go ahead and power it back on. Now I'll go ahead and check to make sure that the serial interfaces has been added. Okay, so the first command I'm going to run here is show IP interface brief, just to ensure that I have serial interfaces that I can use. So I have serial 030 and serial 031. So the interfaces that I'm going to be using on both of the routers to make the connection would be the serial 030. So next I'll have to go and connect it with a serial cable. So I'll go ahead and make router 1 on the right the DCE end, or the router with the clock rate. Okay, so now that I have my two routers connected via the serial interfaces, and that is serial 030, I'm going to go ahead and make the configurations on the serial interface. But first I want to change the host name of the router just to make it more meaningful. And so the default name for the routers is just router. So I'm going to make the router on the left just router 0. And my interface so serial 0/3/0. I'm gonna go ahead and set an IP address on it, and that will be 10.10.10.1, and I'm gonna be using a /30 subnet mask. Like that, and I'll do a no shut. Now I'll go ahead on the router on the other side and make the same configurations, and the second part of this lab will involve changing the default encapsulation method from HDLC to PPP. So this router, I'll set the host name to router 1. So interface serial 0/3/0, and I'll give it an IP address of 10.10.10.2 with the same subnet mask of a /30 252. And I'll issue the no shut command to bring the interface up. And okay, so now I should be able to ping the interface address of each router. So on the router in my left, I'm gonna ping 10.10.10.2, which is the IP address of the neighbor, and I can ping that. Now, by default, Cisco routers are configured with encapsulation method or protocol of HDLC. So I'm going to go ahead and change that. Now, to check to see what protocol is used on the interface, you can just use the command show interface, and the interface I'm looking at is serial 0/3/0, and if you look at somewhere up in the first few lines, see the encapsulation here says HDLC. Okay, so I'll go back into my interface. So interface serial 0/3/0, and the command is encapsulation PPP. Okay, now when I make that configuration, if I change the encapsulation method on one router or on one end of the connection, you see that straight away the interface goes down. So I'll have to go and make the change, the same setting of PPP, enabling PPP encapsulation on the other end of the connection. So I'm already in the interface configuration. So encapsulation PPP. If I do a question mark here, you will see I have a couple of options only: frame relay, HDLC, and PPP. So the method I want to use is PPP, and this will take about a minute or just under a minute before the interfaces come back up. So I can issue a ping just to see what will happen. So I'll ping the neighbor of 10.10.10.1. Okay, so interfaces should be up now, and I can ping my neighbor. Okay, so the next part of this lab, I want to demonstrate how to enable CHAP authentication on the PPP protocol. To enable CHAP authentication on our PPP encapsulation, the first thing is we have to create a local account in the local database of each router. Now the account, the user account that I'm going to create, it must match the name of the host name of the neighboring router. So on router 0, I'm going to go ahead and create a username, and that username will be router 1, because that's what I made the host name of router 1 on the right side of this lab, this router here. So I'm gonna go ahead and say username router 1 and password of Cisco. Just gonna keep it simple. The router on the other end, which is router 1, I'm gonna have to make the same configuration, but now I'll be creating a user name with an account of router 0, because that will be the host name of the neighboring router. So username router 0, and I'll make a password of Cisco, just to keep it simple. Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead now back into the serial interface. So serial 0/3/0, and now I'll enable PPP authentication. So the command is PPP authentication, and if I do a question mark, I have two options: CHAP and PAP. Now, part 2 of this lab, I'll demonstrate how to set PAP as the authentication method. In this lab, I'm just doing CHAP. So CHAP is for Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol, and that's all I need to input: PPP authentication, CHAP, and this is done on the interface that is making the connection. Now this will also bring the interface layer 2 protocol down, because I've made that change. I'm gonna go to the router on the left, or router 0, and I'll go into the interface and make the same configuration. So command again is PPP authentication and CHAP. Now I'm gonna do a ping just to bring the connection back up. It'll take about 30 seconds before they start communicating. And I'm pinging my neighbor, which is 10.10.10.2. And this will take about 30 seconds before they start to negotiate and they can successfully bring the interfaces up. Okay, so now the interface has negotiated the authentication, and if I do a ping now, I should be able to get a reply. So to check to see what protocol we're running, I can issue again the show command. So show interface serial 0/3/0, and here it's telling me that the encapsulation now is PPP. So just to recap, what we have done in this lab is to change the default encapsulation protocol on the serial interface from HDLC to PPP, and then we use CHAP authentication between the serial connection over the PPP protocol. So show run will just give us a recap of the commands that we have run on the interfaces. So I'm looking for the interface serial 030, and these are the commands that I run here. So I give it an IP address, enable the encapsulation of PPP, and then authenticate the PPP with CHAP. So this brings us to the end of this lab. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in authenticating the PPP protocol with PAP authentication, then look at part 2 of this lab.